It makes sense I wasn't really a big fan of this movie. I was always more of an apples and bananas guy myself anyway. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to my channel. Today we're talking about a new Apple TV Plus release, Cherry. Before we begin, let me know in the comments what your thoughts on this movie were, if you already saw it or if you were planning on seeing it, and make sure to hit that thumbs up button if you like these reviews, as it helps me out immensely by getting my channel out there. And if you're new here, I hope you consider hitting that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with reviews of new releases, older films, hidden gems, and so much more on a near daily basis. But now let's jump right into it and let's talk about Cherry. This stars Tom Holland as the title character, who drifts from college dropout to army medic in Iraq, anchored only by his true love, Emily, played by Ciara Bravo. But after returning from the war with PTSD, his life spirals into drugs and crime as he struggles to find his place in the world. This is directed by the Russo brothers, and it's received a fair amount of hype over the last few months, as it's their first big project after coming off Avengers Endgame, as well as the fact that it stars Spider-Man himself, Tom Holland. It's based on the semi-autobiographical book of the same name by Nico Walker, whose path was very similar to the main characters, though with some key differences. Now, I'm not gonna lie. I know a lot of people were highly anticipating this one, given all the reasons I just stated, and since Holland's portrayal of Spider-Man has especially resonated so heavily with fans, anything he does is going to get a lot of attention, and there was even a fair amount of Oscar buzz surrounding his performance towards the beginning of the year. But, to be perfectly honest, this one just didn't grab me, even when I saw the trailer.
Boo! You stink!
And it was mainly for what wound up being one of my biggest criticisms of the movie. In general, I think Tom Holland's a great actor. I think he's really solid when he's out of his comfort zone, like in movies such as The Devil All the Time and The Lost City of Z, and he does try here, but he's really not a good fit for this role, outside of fitting the age range. What would repeatedly take me out of the moment throughout this entire movie is how we're being asked to buy both Holland and Ciara Bravo, two people who have these very innocent, naturally friendly demeanors to them, as these sort of colder individuals who repeatedly find themselves getting further and further down the path of debauchery. I'm not saying they don't give it their all here, but I just couldn't buy either of them as these two characters. They remind me of if you ever tried getting your shy friend to be more assertive, and when they do, it clearly looks like an act because that's not how they naturally are. And that's what I got when watching these two in action here. It all clearly felt like an act to me, and it was difficult to see past these two as actors. On top of that, the film also suffers heavily from its screenplay. For one thing, the runtime's incredibly bloated at 2.5 hours. It's not the slowest moving film I've seen all year, but the Russo brothers get way too caught up in a lot of overly stylized sequences, like lingering shots on certain camera angles and other scenes playing out totally in slow motion, and it seemed they were less interested in telling a compelling story. It seemed like this should have maybe been a miniseries over a film, given how much ground we're covering here. While I know Walker's book was a hit, and I've heard interviews with those who know him well, and it sounds like he really did go down a really interesting path, since Cherry is a parallel for himself, but that's just not conveyed here. We go from Cherry's time at school to going to Iraq, to the PTSD, to his drug addiction, to Emily also becoming addicted to drugs, to his days of robbing banks, to the fractured relationships with other people he knows. And the problem is, the film never really has anything interesting to say about any of the issues Cherry encounters, because despite this being a film that goes on for way too long, we never stay in one particular time of Cherry's life for all that long, since it's trying to cram in so much. For each phase of Cherry's life, most of the time spent is dedicated to overly stylized moments of the Russo brothers showing us how out of their comfort zone they can be, with only a small amount of time dedicated to actually exploring Cherry's character. We find out the minimal amount of information we need, and as soon as it seems like we're headed in an interesting direction, which is a number of times, the film backs off and we move on to something else. Most notably, the film mainly just scratches the surface of Cherry's time as a medic, as most scenes center on him just getting yelled at by his fellow soldiers and superiors, and the PTSD stuff gets completely dropped not too long after it starts up, despite that being an incredibly traumatizing thing. There's also a sequence early on that explores Emily's backstory, which is summed up in literally one brief slow motion cutaway shot, and then we never hear about it again. Though the most aggravating part of this entire movie is the narration. I'm not always the biggest fan of narration in movies, as it tends to be used more as a way of just explaining things to us that could have been shown, and not only do we get that here, but we get it cranked up to the nth degree. Now, I haven't read the original novel, so I don't know how much of this screenplay's dialogue is lifted from it, but here it feels like some of the most overly written dialogue I've seen in a movie all year. Some of the conversations here felt like they'd work in a novel, but just don't translate well to film. We'll especially get instances of Holland repeatedly stopping a scene to break the fourth wall to elaborate on something we can already see for ourselves, though it's the voiceover that has to be the most egregious example of the really terrible dialogue. During the voiceover, Holland really tries going into detail regarding certain scenes, and he's trying to tell us how he feels or other characters may feel, but it's just so on the nose and redundant, especially with more times than I can count of him referencing how he's itching to have sex or wanting to masturbate, usually accompanied by a scene or two of him doing the latter, going on for way too long. And he'll sometimes hit the same talking point multiple times in the same sentence during the narration. Like there's one moment early in the movie where he gets jealous of a male friend of Emily's who she introduces to him, and then we get narration as this goes on, with Holland saying something to the effect of, "I gave him a very manly handshake to let him know I was a man so he'd leave her alone." And it just sounds so incredibly cringeworthy, both because it sounded like dialogue that wasn't actually proofread, as well as the fact that Holland just can't sell playing this type of character. And I'll repeat, I am not saying Holland is incapable of playing characters who are in the vein of Peter Parker. He can play characters who can be taken incredibly seriously. But in general, there are actors who simply don't fit certain character types, and trying to sell him as this sort of tough, wannabe macho guy who kind of embodies elements of toxic masculinity just doesn't work for him, and that played a huge part in why this movie didn't work. Now, I wouldn't say the movie's god-awful. As I said, everyone in the cast certainly does try. Of the supporting performances, my favorites were Jack Rayner as a stylish pop-collar drug dealer named Pills and Coke, as well as Michael Gandolfini as the cousin of one of Cherry's friends, both of whom brought a small sense of levity to the film. And there are certain isolated moments that, on their own, are fine, so it doesn't make the film feel like a total drag. It's just the screenplay doesn't really go off the momentum built up by each scene, and it constantly undermines itself as each somewhat compelling moment is then almost immediately followed by a sequence that values style over substance. And it just feels like the Russos, who spent the last 7 years of their career primarily in the MCU, were trying way too hard to show us that they're capable of more. And I know it might take some time for them to find a unique voice that's independent of their Marvel movies, but they should still focus on what made those films so compelling in the first place, which is a focus on strong, emotional character moments, and not overly stylized shots that were unnecessary while keeping the audience at arm's length. I don't think Cherry's a terrible movie, but it's certainly an underwhelming experience. I think the Russos are capable of more than this, but they try so hard to be stylish here that the film loses sight of its more humane elements. On top of that, while Tom Holland was fine, and I thought he did well with what he was given, at the same time, he really wasn't a good fit for the role, and I had a hard time seeing past both him and Ciara Bravo. I saw two actors doing their best at reciting overwritten dialogue, rather than feeling like I was in the moment with these real people. I think there are some compelling moments and some entertaining sequences, but it just didn't work for me as a whole. Cherry gets a 5 out of 10.
Eh.
What do you mean, eh?
So let me know, did you see Cherry or are you planning to see it, and what were your thoughts? Did you wind up liking this one? Do you have a favorite Tom Holland movie? Let me know in the comments below so we can discuss. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it, and for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching everyone, and keep having fun with film.